All right, so today we're really diving into something that's kind of changing by the minute here and has the potential to really, I think, spiral out of control.
Yeah.
We're talking about Lebanon.
Yeah.
Where a streak of explosions has left people pretty rattled, to say the least.
Yeah, and the most unsettling part is, I mean, these weren't car bombs or rocket attacks, right? We're talking about pagers.
Pagers.
Those little devices we all thought were long gone, exploding in people's pockets.
It's like something out of a techno thriller or something.
Absolutely.
We've got a stack of reports from news outlets all over the world here, from Reuters, the New York Times, Al Jazeera, you name it. And our goal today is to kind of make sense of all this.
Yeah.
You know, what do we know so far? What's still unclear? And what could this mean for a region that's already pretty volatile?
Right. So let me try to paint a picture for you. You imagine you're walking through a crowded market in Beirut, just going about your day, and suddenly people around you start collapsing, clutching their chests, smoke rising from their pockets.
Oh, wow.
These popping sounds. And as the dust settles, the cause becomes horrifyingly clear, pagers exploding like tiny bombs.
Thousands injured, a number of confirmed fatalities, including a child. And as if this image of exploding pagers wasn't strange enough, almost immediately, one group steps forward and says, we know who's behind this.
Right.
Hezbollah, the Iran-backed political and military group that's deeply embedded in Lebanon.
Yeah.
They wasted no time in blaming Israel for what they're calling a coordinated attack on their communications network.
And what makes this even more intriguing is that Hezbollah's use of pagers wasn't some nostalgic throwback, it was calculated. Just months ago, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, warned members to ditch their cell phones, citing concerns about Israeli surveillance.
So they switched to pagers thinking those were more secure, more old school.
Exactly. A move designed to counter Israeli intelligence gathering. And that's what makes this attack so unsettling for Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Their attempt to go low-tech to outmaneuver Israeli surveillance seems to have backfired in a terrifying way.
And of course, as they so often do in these situations, Israel has remained silent, not confirming or denying involvement, but the statements coming from Hezbollah paint a pretty stark picture. They're calling this the biggest security breach they've faced since the Gaza war, and are vowing just punishment for Israel. You don't have to be a military strategist to sense the temperature rising here.
Especially when you consider the already heightened tensions between Hezbollah and Israel.
Right.
This incident has the potential to be a flashpoint, escalating the conflict in a way that could be disastrous for the entire region.
So let's dig into what might have actually happened here. We're not talking about some faulty batch of batteries, right? This seems way too coordinated, too deliberate.
Right. This was no accident. Two main theories are emerging from the expert analysis we've seen. The first is a cybersecurity breach, potentially a sophisticated hack that remotely overloaded the lithium batteries in these pagers, causing them to explode.
Okay, that's scary enough.
Yeah.
But the other scenario is like something straight out of a spy novel.
Exactly. The second theory is a supply chain attack, meaning these devices were tampered with before they even reached Hezbollah.
Wow.
Imagine this Hezbollah, thinking they're receiving a shipment of secure communication devices, actually receives pagers with microscopically implanted explosive, completely undetectable until activated remotely.
That level of sophistication, that ability to infiltrate Hezbollah's supply chain, it makes you wonder who could even be capable of something like that.
What?
Are we talking about a state-level actor here?
That's the critical question, and analysts are hesitant to point fingers just yet. Pulling off a supply chain attack of this magnitude would require immense resources, intelligence, and access, not something just any group can pull off.
And to add another layer of complexity, this wasn't an isolated incident.
You're right. Reports have emerged of a simultaneous pager explosion in Syria resulting in multiple fatalities. While details are scarce, this adds another dimension to the investigation and raises questions about who else might be involved. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with pieces scattered across multiple countries.
It's like trying to follow a trail of breadcrumbs, but the trail keeps branching off in different directions. It's like we're trying to untangle a spider web, but every thread seems to lead to another mystery.
Yeah, and while investigators are trying to connect all these dots, it's crucial to understand what this incident means for the region as a whole.
Right.
We can't ignore the larger geopolitical backdrop, especially the already simmering conflict between Israel and Hezbollah.
And just to give some context for our listeners who maybe aren't totally up on all this history, this isn't just a recent thing.
Right.
We're talking about decades of conflict here with Hezbollah as a major player in Lebanon's really complex political landscape.
Exactly. And this incident comes after 11 months of escalated tensions and almost daily exchanges of fire across the Israel-Lebanon border.
Oh, wow.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced, with communities on both sides living in a constant state of fear.
Yeah.
So imagine the impact of these explosions, not just the physical damage, but the psychological blow.
It's like adding fuel to a fire that's already raging.
Right. And then just a day before these pager explosions, Israel makes a significant announcement.
Okay.
Their cabinet formally added the return of displaced citizens living along the Lebanese border to their list of war goals.
Which basically translates to taking a more aggressive stance towards Hezbollah, right? Like they're saying, we're not just going to sit back and wait for the next attack.
That's how many are interpreting it, yes. And it raises concerns about a wider conflict, one that could easily draw in other regional powers and destabilize an already fragile situation.
Yeah, it seems like everyone is playing a really dangerous game of chess here, with each move carrying potentially devastating consequences.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that Hezbollah has its own motivations and calculations.
Mm-hmm.
While they claim to not want a full-blown war with Israel, they also want to maintain their image as defenders of Lebanon,
right,
and respond to what they perceive as Israeli aggression. It's a very delicate and dangerous balancing act.
So where do we even go from here? Hezbollah is vowing retaliation. Tensions are sky high. What are some of the potential scenarios that could unfold?
Well, the million-dollar question is how Hezbollah chooses to respond.
Right.
Will we see an immediate and proportional retaliation? Will they escalate the situation with more rocket attacks, or will they opt for a more targeted, perhaps even asymmetrical response?
And are they even in a position to retaliate effectively? I mean, considering their communications seem compromised.
Right.
It's like trying to fight back with one hand tied behind your back.
That's the other major consideration. Regardless of who carried out this attack, it's exposed a significant vulnerability in Hezbollah's operations,
right,
potentially even impacting their ability to function effectively. This isn't just about damaged pagers, it's about damaged trust. How can Hezbollah convince its own people, let alone their enemies, that it's a force to be reckoned with when their own communications can be turned into weapons?
Right.
They need to project strength, but they're responding from a weakened position.
It's like they've been dealt a blow before the game even started.
Exactly. And that's where the danger of miscalculation comes in. In a situation as volatile as this, where trust is low and tensions are high, even a slight misjudgment could escalate the situation very rapidly.
And speaking of high-stakes gambles, the situation within Israel adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing. We touched on Israel's recent policy shift, but there's also a lot of internal political turmoil happening at the same time.
Right.
For example, there are reports that Prime Minister Netanyahu is considering firing his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, right in the middle of this crisis.
It certainly raises eyebrows.
Yeah.
It seems there's some disagreement within the Israeli government about how to handle this conflict,
Right.
with some advocating for a more cautious approach and others pushing for a stronger hand. And any change in leadership, particularly in the midst of such a delicate situation, could have really significant repercussions.
It's almost as if the world is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a moment and bring it back to our listeners. Why should they care about this? What's the bigger takeaway here?
I think the most crucial takeaway, and this is a recurring theme across the various reports we've analyzed, is that this attack, as unusual as it may seem, highlights the vulnerability of even low-tech communication in our increasingly digital world.
Meaning, if a group like Hezbollah, known for its operational security and often relying on older technologies, can be targeted in this way, it sets a concerning precedent.
Exactly. It raises profound questions about the future of warfare and espionage. What does it mean when something as seemingly simple as a pager can be turned into a weapon?
Right.
What new threats are emerging that we haven't even considered?
It's unsettling, to say the least.
It really is.
And it makes you wonder what other vulnerabilities are lurking out there, waiting to be exploited. It's just crazy to me, like all this from pagers. It's like we're living in some kind of alternate reality where something so simple can be so dangerous.
It really does make you question, what we consider to be a threat these days.
Right.
We tend to think about, cyber attacks and hacking and all this sophisticated stuff.
Right.
But this incident shows that even the most basic technologies can be exploited in ways we might not expect.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the simplest tools can be the most effective.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder about, the potential for copycat attacks using these kinds of unexpected methods.
Exactly. And it's not just about the technology itself, right? It's about the psychological impact.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine being a Hezbollah operative, trained to be, super cautious and secretive, and then suddenly the very tool you're using to communicate could literally explode in your face.
Right. It really undermines their sense of security, their confidence in their own operations.
It's like a blow to their whole sense of, invincibility.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly difficult to recover from.
So where does Hezbollah go from here? How do they bounce back from something like this?
Well, they're going to need to reassure their members, reestablish that sense of security,
Right.
and demonstrate that they can adapt to this new threat landscape,
Right.
whether that means retreating even further into secrecy, embracing even more low-tech solutions, or finding completely new ways to communicate and operate remains to be seen.
It's a real dilemma for them.
Is.
They need to respond forcefully,
Yeah,
but they also can't appear weak or vulnerable.
Exactly. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of a region that's already incredibly tense.
Right. We can't forget about the bigger picture here.
No, absolutely not.
The slightest miscalculation, the smallest spark, could ignite a much larger conflict.
Absolutely. The stakes couldn't be higher. We've got a long-standing conflict, multiple actors with their own agendas, and now this added layer of uncertainty.
It's a reminder that the world is a very unpredictable place, and things can change in an instant.
That they can.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, explored the initial shock of these pager explosions, delved into the potential causes and the wider geopolitical implications, and talked about the potential for escalation.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It really is, and there are still many unanswered questions.
As always.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the biggest takeaway for me and maybe for our listeners is just how interconnected everything is these days.
Absolutely.
Something as seemingly insignificant as a pager can suddenly become a weapon of chaos and destruction.
And it really highlights the importance of staying informed, being aware of the potential threats, and understanding how even the smallest actions can have far-reaching consequences.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So until next time, stay curious, everyone, and stay safe.